Welcome to our Azure Incident Retrospective. I'm David Steele.
I'm Sami Kuba. We work in the Azure Communications team.
In addition to providing a written post-incident review after major outages, we also now host these retrospective conversations.
You're about to watch a recording of a live stream where we invited impacted customers through Azure Service Health to join our panel of experts in a live Q&A.
We had a conversation about reliability as a shared responsibility. So this includes our learnings at Microsoft, as well as guidance for customers and partners to be more resilient.
We hope you enjoy the conversation that follows.
Right, today we're here to talk about a pretty major service incident that impacted customers. We're running 2 sessions to support our customers in multiple time zones. So if you're watching session number 1, you're watching this on a 30-second delay. If you're watching session number 2, you're watching this on a 12-hour delay, but it won't matter because the experience to you is the same. And during both sessions, we've got subject matter experts from our relevant service teams standing by, ready to answer your questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A. That's our question and answer side panel in the top right-hand corner of your Teams live event screen. That Q&A is open now. Go ahead, ask us anything about the talk track, about this incident, or about incident readiness generally.
Super. In today's incident, we're going to focus on an Azure storage issue. This led to unreachable blob and data lake storage. And one of the key characteristics of this outage was it is, in addition to impacting multiple services, it was multi-regional.
That's obviously a big problem. We don't have multi-region outages very often here in Azure, so definitely one that we wanted to talk about. This incident impacted customers back on the 13th of November, and for some customers, they experienced this as an almost 12-hour outage. So this was quite a big deal. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today.
Super. We have the Corporate Vice President of Azure Storage, Ahmed Shihab. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Ahmed, can I kick off with asking, with this incident, with this outage, what did it feel like for our impacted customers? What did they experience?
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Good day to everybody that joined us today. Let's start by thinking about it from the customer's perspective. What did it feel like? What did it see? So you would have experienced an almost total loss of access to certain resources, certain accounts. The event impacted a subset of accounts that are available in those regions, but those were high impact to customers in the sense that lost access to their data. Although the data was retained and continued to be available, access to it was curtailed and it was almost zero for a certain amount of time. For a lot of customers, the outage was spread from couple of hours to up to 12 hours for certain accounts. And not everybody experienced all 12 hours. They experienced a lot of customers were back on the air with their services within 4 to 6 hours. But there was a long tail of repairs that we had to do to get back the final accounts that had more complicated recoveries that we had to do. But the overall incident took about 12 hours.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like, it was, like you say, mileage varied for different customers as far as how long the outage was here. And then I'm glad you mentioned this. So data lake and blob storage, as well as the different services that depended on those under the hood. So Ahmed, before we get into the specifics of what contributed to impact here, could you just help us to introduce the relevant components, right? Like who are the characters in our story here? How do these components or these elements usually work together?
So as you can imagine, storage services like Blob and the data lake services are very complicated services behind the scenes. There are many moving parts. There are many layers of defense that allow us to operate the service even under degradation and certain failure scenarios, so customers don't see those impacts. One of the services that we use internally is what's called Azure Traffic Manager. That service takes one endpoint IP address, if you will, and then in the background distributes the data across the different physical data points or the racks where we store the data so that we can aggregate performance, aggregate resiliency, and deliver the experience that customers want for capacity and performance. Behind that sits a couple of layers of our services to do with how we receive the data and the request, and how we then distribute and service the data in a very structured and safe way. So we always guarantee the data durability of the data. In this particular case, what happened is that when you first come in, there is what's called a traffic profile that's used by the traffic manager service. And that describes for that particular customer, for that particular account they're trying to access, how to then distribute the request, whether it's a read or a write request. Those allow you to come in from any region, from any zone, and then have the same experience in terms of latencies and performance. This is the thing that was impacted in this particular outage, that we had we lost access to those profiles, and therefore customers making the request to those endpoints couldn't reach where the data was located, and that's what manifested in this particular case. As you can imagine, the service is resilient, is designed to be resilient against such things and limiting the blast radius. So the way that we handle those profiles and the way we handle managing those resources is we distribute them among subscriptions. And we distribute them such that loss of any one of those areas or those resources doesn't have a wide impact to customers. To some extent, this worked here. To some extent, it didn't. Clearly, we affected more than one customer. We affected about 1,200 accounts in all. But the impact to customers was obviously very large. The other thing that typically we like to do is to make sure those resources are not multi-regional so that we, again, limit the blast radius and allow customers to have certain backup options. In this case, we made mistakes, and there were issues associated with how we built, how certain mistakes propagated to create this large outage for customers.
Super. And Ahmed, I know because Azure is a complex system, and complex systems fail in very complicated ways. And while we had the trigger event as an unintentional and accidental deletion, when we think about, as you said, you alluded to the resiliency in the service, what are the other contributing factors that led to this kind of outage being bigger than it should have been, perhaps?
Yeah. So the trigger event, as we pointed out, is the accidental deletion of the resources that describe the traffic profiles. All the services operated as expected. So when we delete a resource profile, it's because we deleted the account. The customer doesn't want that service anymore. So we remove that from production. And that's a normal behavior of the service. It is for security reasons. It is for, obviously, correctness reasons. And in this case, the services that we are operating in Azure actually operated as expected. So when we deleted the resource, they went ahead and deleted the profile, which then led to the particular outage. So the services themselves were operating as expected. The mistake, the trigger event that led to this was the accidental deletion of a subscription that contained those. It's a resource group within a subscription that contained those resource profiles. And that trigger event was part of a routine cleanup that we do after certain, for security and operational reasons. But in this particular case, that particular resource group contained more resources than it should have done, and they were cross-connected to our service versus being part of the original deleted service. So in this particular case, the impact was larger than we liked. The other contributing factor to the scale of this event was this particular resource group contained data or resources that were for multiple regions, described traffic profiles in multiple regions. So when the resource group was deleted, clearly that we affected multiple regions, and that was a particularly difficult thing to accept, in that we had that exposure.
Great summary. Thank you, Ahmed. We'll move on to our learnings and repair items towards the end, but appreciate that understanding of the trigger event. But the other thing that I noticed in the post-incident review was that we had some detection issues here, right? It seems like we only learned of the issues that customers were having once those customers were impacted and brought it to our attention. Is that right? It sounds like there was a monitoring gap here.
Unfortunately, that is right. It's clearly something that I'll talk about the particular lessons and what we're going to do about that shortly. But let's describe what we do normally. Normally, we have monitors that sit around our service and check the availability of our endpoints. So in the same way a customer will come talk to our service and access the service, we have monitors that look at the accessibility of our service. The monitors that we had running at this particular incident their endpoints weren't affected by this particular resource group. So they did not fire in as quickly. They would have fired and created a high severity incident for us had that been affected, and that monitor would have fired. So while we did have that monitor, it just wasn't in the blast radius of the event. Clearly, that highlighted a gap for us that we are actively repairing. We'll talk about that shortly. But in this particular case, the customer actually called us and said, "Hey, there's a problem going on here." And that incident very quickly escalated to a high severity incident for us. Once, however, we became aware of that incident, we were able to diagnose what had led to this incident very quickly based on our internal monitoring. So our service is extremely well instrumented for internal monitors that tell us how different parts of the service are operating. So we were able to get to understand what happened in reasonably quick time.
So, super. Thank you very much, Ahmed. So it was interesting because we jumped on it. I'd like to double click on it a little bit. So we said once it was flagged to our attention, not through our monitoring, unfortunately. Once we got there, we spoke about very quickly you were able to determine it. How do you go about mitigating it as well? Because it was quite a long outage.
Yes, it was a long outage, longer than we obviously like or accept for our customers. The detection for us was straightforward in that we looked at the traffic patterns, we understood our different monitors inside the service, and we were able to determine there was a broken link between the external IP addresses, the VIPs, and the internal service. And that very quickly led us to the traffic profiles, and then understood that there was a deletion that was going on at the time. Right? To mitigate that, the simple thing to do is to recover those profiles or to rebuild them. Right? Rebuilding those profiles isn't a difficult process. It's reasonably straightforward. Unfortunately, the tools that we use for such recoveries weren't up to the scale that we faced. So even only roughly 1,200 accounts were affected. There are many more traffic profiles that we had to recover, and there's a lot of confusion about customer priorities asking us to do certain things in certain ways that actually led us down some interesting dead ends or cul-de-sacs that we had to work through. But that wasn't the major effect as to why we were late. The major effect is that our recovery tools, although it did work, they didn't operate at the speed and scale that we would have liked to recover more quickly. And those are certainly some of the lessons we had to learn. So we ended up having to operate those tools manually. We actually crowdsourced our internal team. So we worked across 3 different time zones. We brought our entire engineering team to help with those mitigations. And for the large majority of customers, a lot of their resources were back on the air within a few hours, reasonably quickly. Some customers, we particularly chose to have different mitigations for them to get them back more quickly. And our goal really is to recover the customer services, especially any business impacting things. But the long tail, as I said, was where we had to do manual recoveries that took us a little longer than we expected. Well, a lot longer than we expected. And that is certainly the lessons that we learn and take away from that. That mitigation should really have taken us a lot less time.
Right. Yeah, great summary there. So it was all hands on deck, but perhaps a little too manual for our liking. So but we've talked through now the different phases of the incident lifecycle. I want to pivot to our learnings and repair items. Now, when we talk about this accidental deletion, it's important we should clarify for customers, we try to resist framing anything as human error, right? If one of our engineers triggered an unexpected outcome, that's obviously a signal that our system or our process or our tooling didn't provide that operator with sufficient visibility into the state of the system, or perhaps we lacked appropriate safeguards. So Ahmed, I wonder if you could talk us through what your team's doing to de-risk this kind of accidental operation.
So the operator that led to this incident, there's no blame for the operator. Ultimately, as you said, we needed to have created more friction in some of these high blast radius environments, and ultimately given the right cues and the right automation to prevent such things from happening. That is one of the key lessons that we've taken in terms of, and we put into effect immediately, is that we create a lot more friction in the system for the short term, because ultimately friction cannot solve everything. But for the short term, it allows us to slow down, exercise more judgment, ask more questions, and look at the specifics associated with these things with much more fine-grained details. The second set of learnings is that obviously we talked about this is a multi-regional outage, and the blast radius associated with those resource groups was just too large. This is not our policy. Our policy is to have minimize the blast radius by containing resources that are zonal and regional at the most. Clearly, in this case, we had a gap in the way that we were building things, and the automation to test for these things, for the large blast radius subscriptions and resource groups. And that's something we obviously will be addressing, but we'll have addressed actually already. In this particular case, we've accepted the changes that we're making is introduce the friction, but we're also introducing better cues for the approvers in terms of when you come to do a mutating change to the service, that you have a lot more details about the impact of that change. This is going to be an evolving process for us. Clearly, we understood this particular incident, but our focus is now much wider than this very, very specific incident. We're looking across our service with different eyes in the sense of understanding where else might we be exposed? Where else might we have problems? And how do we not only fix it once, but continue to monitor and make sure this doesn't occur again? Right? We don't want another incident like this. We don't want an incident anywhere near this level of severity for customers. So that's on us to build the tooling and make sure that we're monitoring this on an automated way. So anytime there's a deviation, a defect, we're able to flag it and fix it.
Super, thank you, Ahmed. And it is difficult to go on a journey and unearth blind spots. I do empathize. But returning to the monitoring issue, when we spoke about we spoke about an issue being able to detect this issue, and I do want to double click and to say, how are we what's our approach to detect this class of issue more robust in the future? Is there any more information that you can provide for us there?
Yes, there's two types of things. So one, obviously, I just talked about in the sense of making sure our service monitoring for the resource blast radius is maintained, and that's an operational discipline we're building internally. There is the second question about detection of availability loss for customers, and how do we make that more robust, such that customers shouldn't have to tell us there's a problem at any scale. And that is where we've already made changes. We're working with some of our customers already to build automation and monitoring that looks at all of the resources rather than focusing on a canary or a specific indicator, a leading indicator that may not be affected by these resources, like that happened here. We're building automation that is much more widespread, or the monitoring of our endpoints that really takes care of all of our customers' experience. And we are in the process of deploying that right now. We've already built some automation. We're fine-tuning it right now for this monitoring, and we're already seeing very small-scale detection of fine-grained issues that we are flagging to customers, to some of our, if you like, alpha, beta customers working with us on this. But this is something that's already in place. In the same way that we have instituted the changes for the blast radius already, this is something already in place for, and we will continue to scale that throughout the next few weeks. That allows us to not only monitor for this specific action, but any kind of availability loss that customers experience, and then we can detect and mitigate more quickly.
Great, thanks, Ahmed. That's a great summary of some of the detection improvements here. You mentioned mitigation, and I wanted just to click into that as well. Because of this big long tail recovery for some customers, can you talk a little more about those investments that we're making to recover more quickly? You mentioned that kind of tooling to help solve some of these more manual repairs is something that will kind of set us up for success moving forward?
Yeah, there's a number of things. The worst time, obviously, that you have you can find these lessons is during an outage. That affects customers in a very negative ways, and frankly, we don't want to have that. So a number of things that we are reviewing all of our recovery tools as part of the process of this repair set of items that we're working through, and making sure that we test for large-scale recoveries. In this particular case, we had procedures, we had ability to do things, we were able, in theory, we should have been able to recover more quickly. Unfortunately, the testing and the scaling wasn't done as accurately as I would have liked. And that's the pivot that we're making now, is that we are going through systematically through all our recovery tools, making sure that we test them to operate at the scale, at a very large scale. So we'll simulate multi-regional outages, we'll simulate large outages, and actually put the operational tools through their paces. And we'll do that on a regular basis. So any regressions will be detected well ahead of any types of incidents. That operational posture helps us make sure that two things. One, our tools work, and we are confident they work and operate as expected to help us with the mitigation. In this particular outage, we knew what the steps were to mitigate. It's just the pace was slower than we like. And we obviously run into some corner cases that we had to go work through. So taking the lessons here, we are applying those lessons to those specific tools for this particular outage. And we are increasing our focus to look at our repair tools for other types of incidents, other types of issues that could happen. And the third part is we are building a much more focused on operational practice to test these tools on a regular basis through game days and operational reviews that will probe and poke at these things more carefully. So combining those actions with prevention, detection, and mitigation, we're proceeding down these three dimensions in parallel, and we're moving there very quickly. We're not waiting for another incident. We're not waiting for learnings. We're now forcing those scenarios and simulations so that we can take those learnings ourselves without customer impact.
Super. Thank you very much, Ahmed. And Ahmed, I know a lot of the times you say, while outages are inevitable, impact doesn't always have to be, depending on how customers architect and which resiliency features in Azure, how they architect their application. There's a chance that they can protect themselves from impact when there is an outage. Was there anything customers could have done, or is there any way they could have architected to survive or endure this kind of an issue?
Let me describe the typical mitigations that customers can choose for themselves, and then we can talk about why some of those did not necessarily apply here and what we're doing about them to make sure they always apply in the future. So as you know, we have a very extensive set of products and services that allow you to store things both within one zone, across multiple zones, or zone resilience. And we also have multi-regional storage that allows you to create copies of your data in two different regions. So should a zone go down, a region go down, you can continue to operate your business. And a lot of our customers take advantage of those resiliency features to put their most important data, most critical business operations in those more resilient storage types. And a lot of customers who, for example, use zonally resilient storage weren't affected by this particular outage. They were able to ride through that. However, customers also, in this particular case, there was a particularly nasty effect in that it was multi-regional. So even though you may have chosen to put your data in two regions, some of those customers, depending on which regions were affected, could not access all the data from the two regions. So that affected them in two places. But typically, we would say if you build your resilience for your data types according to how important it is for you for business continuity, and we will work to make sure that you can have that backup option as you need it. So one of the things that we are very clearly disappointed with was the multi-regional nature of this that precluded customers from being able to use the regional backup option. And we are working through that to make sure that the blast radius of any future events will be limited at the most to one region, ideally to a zone or less. So these are things that we are continuing to work for to help customers when they make those choices to be able to use them in the events of outages. As you said, Sami, we live in a very complex world. And there are lots of sophisticated software, there's lots of sophisticated hardware, there's layers, physical layers in the world that could, through a random fact, could cause some kind of outage. But we would like, and we want to be able to have customers depend on our resiliency features. And that's the thing we are frankly most disappointed with in this particular outage. And
that's great. Thank you, Ahmed. It's good to hear there are some kind of storage resiliency best practices, even though they might not have saved customers from impact for this specific outage. I'm mindful of time, so I've saved my last question for my co-host here. Sammy runs our Azure communications team. So I wanted to say, now that Ahmed has run us through the outage itself, how did our communications do? Did we keep customers up to date?
So initially, of course, there was a delay in detection, which led to a delay in communication. So once we initially understood, okay, there was an issue, we initially thought it was with Databricks. So Azure Databricks were the first service to raise a flag and say that they were impacted. We immediately went to our public banner. We weren't able to identify our customers quickly and targeted enough. But within 10 minutes, I think, of us raising a flag on our status page, we'd sent out corresponding portal communications. And that was at around 3 o'clock a.m. UTC, plus or minus 5 minutes. The issue was really that we didn't communicate in a targeted fashion to the impacted storage customers until over an hour and a half later. And so net, when customers think about it, it was really 4 hours into the outage before a customer leveraging storage would have received an Azure Service Health Alert. We don't want to rely on that status page. It's not very durable. Customers shouldn't depend on it. So there was a gap, and it was great that we sent out portal comms pretty quickly for Azure Databricks from when we knew, not from when the impact started. But again, kind of getting the right message to the right customers in time was an issue. As Ahmed alluded to, the scenario is quite edge, and as a result, we try and use. We speak about our brain automation, which is our AI ops, which communicates to impacted customers within 15 minutes. This isn't high up on the list to get in there. We do assess, hey, what is the value we're going to get for onboarding these services in a very quick period of time? And we got to look at we got to maybe reevaluate the service. But communications and the customer experience for this was pretty painful, I would say.
Thank you for watching this Azure Incident Retrospective.
At the scale of which our cloud operates at, incidents are inevitable.
Just as Microsoft is always learning and improving, we hope our customers and partners can learn from these too, and provide a lot of reliability guidance through the Azure well-architected framework.
To ensure that you get posted incident reviews after an outage and invites to join these live stream Q&A sessions, please ensure that you have Azure Service Health Alert set up.
We really focused on being as transparent as possible and showing up and being accountable after these major incidents.
Whether it's an outage, a security, or a privacy event, Microsoft is investing heavily in these events to ensure that we earn, maintain, and at times rebuild your trust. Thanks for joining us.